For years, the only thing Eliza Whitlow let through her door was the ghost of her dead husband. But the steady knock that echoed across her desolate ranch wasn't a ghost. It was a man with weary eyes and a proposal, and behind him the reason she couldn't say no. A small girl with a gaze that asked for more than work, it asked for a place to stop running. The Arizona sun had started its slow surrender beyond the jagged silhouette of the Dragoon Mountains. A warm copper hue blanketed the land, casting long, tired shadows over the red dirt and brittle brush. Wind whispered low across the open plain, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. But the only sound near the Whitlow ranch was the gentle creak of wood-old boards shifting as the heat bled away from them. Eliza Whitlow stood on the porch of her ranch house, hands calloused sleeves, rolled a rifle leaning quiet beside the doorframe. Her eyes, flint gray and sharp from seasons of solitude, scanned the empty horizon out of habit more than fear. Life hadn't afforded her much peace these last few years, not since her husband had died with a bullet in his chest and dust in his mouth just a few miles west of here. She wiped her palms on her faded skirt and turned toward the kettle inside when she heard it a knock. Not timid, not brash, just steady, like someone who knew how to wait. She swung the door open, gaze firm finger brushing near the rifle tuck. A man stood there, hat in hand. Boots' weathered coat dusted from the trail. He looked to be in his late 30s, jaw square, beneath a few days' stubble shoulders, wide from work not words. But it wasn't him that caught her breath. It was the little girl peeking out from behind him. The child couldn't have been more than 10. Her cheeks smudged, eyes wide with cautious awe. She held onto a bundle of blankets and a worn cloth doll missing one button eye. A single braid slipped out from beneath her bonnet and her expression soft. Searching was the kind that asked permission before it dared to hope. "I was told you need a rancher," the man said, voice low as a dry creek bed. "Name's Hank Mercer. This here's my daughter June." Eliza didn't answer right off. Her instincts warned her to stay quiet, to shut the door, and go back to a world where no one could leave her again. But those instincts didn't have to meet the little girl's eyes. She tilted her head, scanning him. "Who told you that old man Farley down in Benson said your hands left come spring? Said you run this place by yourself, that I do." Eliza said, "Don't mean I need help." June shifted her weight, nudging forward just enough for Eliza to see how thin her arms were beneath the sleeves. The girl didn't speak, didn't fidget. She just watched Eliza like she was watching for a crack in the earth to leap across. Hank cleared his throat. "We won't trouble you. Just looking for a roof tonight. I'll sleep in the barn if need be." Eliza let the silence stretch. The wind picked up dry and restless. Then she stepped aside. Barns full of tools and feed. She said, "You can stay in the spare room." One night Hank tipped his hat. "Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet." She led them inside. The house was plain, the furniture carved from local pine and worn smooth by years of use. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the smell of stewed venison and beans lingered in the air. June stood near the doorway until Eliza nodded toward the table. The girl sat down without a word, folding her hands in her lap. They ate in near silence. Hank didn't press, didn't boast, just spooned stew into his bowl and glanced now and again toward June to make sure she was eaten. Eliza sat opposite, eyes half watching them, both trying not to feel the shift in the air. It was the girl who broke the spell. "Do you have any animals?" she asked Eliza. Voice small but clear, but Eliza looked up. A few hens, one stubborn milk cow, 2 old horses who ain't worth much but know the land. June smiled faintly. "I like animals." That was all. Just 4 words, but something loosened in Eliza's chest. Something that had been locked up tight since the coffin came home and the neighbors stopped calling. "You can meet him in the morning," she said softly. June looked at her father for permission. He gave a small nod. The girl turned back and whispered, "Thank you." After supper, Eliza showed them to the spare room. It had been used once long ago when kinfolk visited during better times. Now it smelled of cedar and dust and years between heartbeats. "I'll fetch you water," she said. Hank stood in the doorway a long second. "I appreciate it, Miss Whitlow. Well, be gone at first light if you say so." She paused, one hand on the doorframe. "We'll see come morning." As the door clicked shut behind her, Eliza stood in the hallway staring at nothing. There was a warmth in the house tonight that hadn't been there for years. Not heat from the fire, but from something quieter, something just starting to bloom. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't mind the sound of someone else breathing under her roof. Morning came slow and gold across the Arizona flatland, lighting up the sand-colored walls of the Whitlow Ranch like fire-licking dry wood. The wind had quieted overnight, leaving behind a sky so wide and blue it made the earth seem like it was holding its breath. Eliza rose before the rooster as she always did. Habit was the kind of friend you didn't like but couldn't do without. She lit the stove, fed the fire, then went outside to check the coos. One hen was broody, 2 eggs broken. The fence gate still hung crooked. The wheelbarrow lay tipped in the weeds beside the barn, where the grass had begun swallowing its spokes. The place was falling apart. Bit by bit, quietly, like it didn't want her to notice all at once. Inside, the air still held the scent of last night's stew and boodle. She heard the creak of floorboards and turned. Hank stood at the bottom of the stairs, hair still damp from the basin, sleeves rolled. He looked like he belonged to the land. Not fresh, not polished, just carved from it. "I figured you might need a hand with the animals," he said. "I know it's only one night, but June's still sleeping, and I ain't good at sitting idle." Eliza didn't argue. She handed him a bucket and pointed toward the barn. "The stall on the left's the worst of them." Shovels leaned in the corner. "Don't move the cow too fast. She kicks when she's grumpy." Hank nodded once and without another word headed out. She watched him through the window a moment, unsure why the sight of a man hauling hay and brushing a sunburnt geeling made her chest tighten. It had been years since someone else's shadow crossed that yard before noon. She turned to finish the eggs and biscuits. By the time June wandered in hair rescue rubbing sleep from her eyes, the smell of breakfast had settled thick in the kitchen. She paused at the door, blinking. Eliza raised an eyebrow. "You eat," June nodded, slipping into the chair at the table. She picked up her fork, but didn't start. "You waiting on something?" Eliza asked. June looked up. "Papa always says we ought to say thanks first." Eliza stilled, then slowly set her cup down. "Well, that's fine by me." June bowed her head and whispered something too soft to catch, but Eliza heard her own name in it just once. Near the end, they ate in calm silence. When Hank came back in boots, dusty shirt damp with sweat, he gave June's hair a light towel and took his seat. "You didn't have to do all that," Eliza said, motioning to the dirt he tracked. "I know," he replied. "Did it anyway." She didn't answer, just poured him coffee. Later that morning, as June helped collect eggs, giggling, when a hen pecked her sleeve, Eliza stood near the barn, eyes trailing over what was left of the life she and Benjamin had tried to build. Her husband had been a gunslinger, once known by too many names in too many territories, but he'd laid down his pistols the year June was born, taken up plow and hammer instead. He built the barn with his own hands, branded every calf, kissed her knuckles after days that ran too long and hope that ran too thin. He died behind a storage shed in Tombstone, shot while trying to stop 3 masked men from burning the town's grain stockpile during a drought. He wasn't wearing a gun when it happened. Eliza never picked one up again either. Not until after. Now the wind crept through the cracked barn slats, and every creak reminded her of the things he'd left unfinished. By noon, Hank had fixed the south fence rail using spare posts and found 2 rusted tools in the shed he promised to sharpen. Eliza watched as he showed June how to wind twine for the broken gate, his voice steady, patient. The girl looked up at her and asked, "Ma'am, is it okay if I help him?" Eliza blinked. The title wasn't new, but the way June said it, soft, respectful, almost warm, it landed different. Of course she managed. That evening, Hank lit the lanterns without being asked. He oiled the hinges on the back door. He fed the dogs and repaired the broom handle that had split last winter. Eliza sat on the porch, arms folded, listening to June's laughter inside, as Hank told her a story about a jackrabbit that stole a horse's hat. She didn't smile, not fully, but her hand rested flat on her lap. Calm, she hadn't asked them to stay. But tonight she didn't want them to leave. The sky had shifted. By late afternoon, the horizon over the mesa turned a bruised purple, clouds stacking like cattle along a dry ridge. The air thickened, electric, carrying that heavy stillness. Only desert folk knew the kind that spoke of lightning before thunder, of rain before ruin. Eliza stood near the well, one hand shading her eyes. The wind picked up quick, sudden and mean, kicking up dust and rattling the brittle mesquite branches. She turned to see the cow pens roofing a patchwork of timber and old tin beginning to shudder and groan. A loose sheet of metal flapped, threatening to tear free. "Roof's going to give," she muttered, already moving. Hank emerged from the barn carrying a coiled rope and hammer, reading her face without needing words. "We best get up there now before it flies off and slices one of us." Eliza nodded, grabbing the ladder from the sidewall. They worked in tandem, boots crunching gravel as they propped it against the slanted side of the cattle shelter. The wind howled louder now, like wolves arguing with the sky. "I'll take the left side," Eliza called. "You sure I built this roof with Ben? I know which boards hate me most." That silenced him for a beat, but he gave a short nod, climbed up beside her, and got to work. The metal stung their hands, already cold from the coming front. Every nail Hank pounded echoed across the yard like distant gunfire. Eliza's braid slapped her neck as she knelt near a buckled corner, steadying the sheet with one hand while hammering with the other. Then her foot slipped. The old plank beneath her had rotted through, giving way without warning. She pitched sideways, wind catching her coat like a sail. For a split second, the sky spun. The world tilted and a hand caught her wrist. "Got you!" Hank's voice cut through the storm like a rope through water. He had lunged one knee on the rafter, his free hand gripping a beam for balance. Eliza's heart pounded wild in her throat as her legs dangled. Boots scraping the edge, his eyes locked with hers. Not fear, not fury, just something fierce and full, like he wasn't going to let go, even if the sky came down around them. Eliza couldn't speak. She didn't need to. He hauled her up with a grunt, pulling her beside him, until they both lay flat, gasping side by side on the roof, the wind roaring above them. Rain started to fall, sparse, sharp. Eliza stared at the clouds, breathing hard, not from the climb, but from the flood of memory rushing in. The last time a storm hit like this, Benjamin had ridden into town with 2 sacks of grain. He said he'd be back by supper. Said the clouds looked mean, but he wasn't worried. Said he'd be careful. That was the night she sat by the hearth with her rifle across her lap, praying the thunder would cover the sound of her fear. That was the night the sheriff came back without him. Eliza sat up, wiped her face, not sure if it was rain or something older. Hank watched her, but didn't speak. He didn't ask. He didn't press. He just got to his feet and offered a hand again. This time she took it together. They finished securing the roof. The storm crashed down as they climbed off. Wind ripping sideways now, rain hitting like pebbles. By the time they made it back to the house, soaked to the bone, June was waiting inside, eyes wide with worry. She ran to Eliza, first arms outstretched. Eliza froze just for a moment, then she knelt, pulling the child into her arms. June buried her face into Eliza's coat, whispering, "I thought the storm took you too." Eliza closed her eyes, arms tight around her chest, aching with something both sharp and sweet. "Not today," she said. Lightning cracked in the distance. But inside, the only sound was the steady, quiet beat of 3 hearts warm against the cold. Part 4. Letters buried beneath the floorboards. The storm left behind a hush. By morning, the world looked scrubbed clean. Desert air sharp with peat. The earth damp and darker than usual. The cattle were quiet, their hooves sunk into softened mud. The hens clucked low, cautious, like even they knew something had changed overnight. Inside the house, Eliza moved through the parlor with a rag in one hand and a quiet ache in her chest. She paused near the old bookshelf Benjamin had built himself. The bottom drawer hadn't opened right since he passed, swollen with time and swollen with memory. On a whim, she knelt and tugged. This time, something gave. It wasn't the drawer that opened, but the panel behind it warped just enough to reveal a small hollow in the floorboards. Her breath caught. She reached in and pulled out a bundle of aged paper bound with string darkened by oil and dust. Letters, each one addressed to her husband. She sat down on the hearth rug, knees tucked under, and unfolded the top sheet with fingers that trembled. "Ben, they came again. Same men in nicer clothes. Said the syndicate's offer was final. Told me to reconsider or risk losing more than just cattle. If they show up at Whitlow Ranch, I want you to pack Eliza and ride. Don't wait for lawmen. They own most of them now. You were right not to take their coin, but brother, be careful. They don't forget. They don't forgive. TL." Eliza blinked. Her mouth went dry. She read the next letter. Then the next and the next. There were 7 in all, dated across nearly a year. From men her husband trusted friends some, from towns no longer on the map. All of them warning the same thing: the Dry Creek Land Syndicate, a powerful group buying up land across Arizona, using threats, bribes, and sometimes worse. And her husband had told her none of it. The truth hit like a horse's kick. Benjamin didn't die in a random holdup. He was hunted, silenced, a weight pressed on her chest, a deep, gnawing betrayal, not of trust, but of all the time she'd spent believing he was just a victim of bad luck. Behind her, floorboards creaked. She turned to see Hank standing there, a towel in one hand, brow furrowed. "You all right?" She held up the letters. "I found these hidden." He knelt beside her and read a few lines, his jaw tightening. "Syndicate," he muttered. "That name still poisons land deeds all the way from Tucson to Santa Fe. I lost a neighbor to them back in '79. Refused to sell his orchard. Next week his well caught fire. Water turned black." Eliza stared into the flames. "He never told me, not a word. He was protecting you. Thought if he kept it quiet, it'd die in the dust. But it didn't," she whispered. "And now it might come back for me. For June." Hank's eyes met hers, steady and fierce. "Then we won't let it," she scoffed faintly. He didn't blink. "I know a man in town, Joseph Calder. Used to be a circuit lawyer before the war. Now he handles land claims disputes, even quiet investigations. If there's anything legal left in this mess, he'll find it." Eliza hesitated. "That would mean making this real, making enemies." "You already have enemies," Hank said. "Might as well have allies, too." She looked down at the letters again. The ink had faded, but the truth burned fresh. After a moment, she stood. "We leave at first light." Hank nodded. "I'll saddle the horses." As he stepped away, Eliza gathered the letters and tucked them into a worn leather pouch, the kind her husband used to carry on long rides. She pressed it against her chest, closed her eyes, and whispered, "You should have told me, Ben, but I'll finish what you started." The wind outside picked up again, not howling, not angry, just moving forward. And so would she. Night settled over the desert like a heavy quilt stitched with cold stars and the soft breath of distant coyotes. The wind had quieted, but the air still carried the bite of winter's first whisper. Inside the Whitlow house, the fire in the hearth crackled slow and low, casting amber light on the pinewood walls and worn rugs that had seen more boots than bare feet. Eliza sat on the floor back against the leg of the old rocking chair. A mug of coffee rested between her hands, gone lukewarm but untouched. She didn't need heat. The flicker of flame, the sound of it, that was warmth enough tonight. Across from her, Hank leaned forward in the armchair, elbows on knees, his hat sat on the table behind him. Shadows moved across his face, softening the lines around his eyes but deepening the ones near his mouth. They hadn't said much since supper. June had gone to sleep with her doll tucked under one arm and Eliza's old shawl over her shoulders. The girl had insisted on hearing the rooster story again, the one where the bird stole the mail pouch and got chased through half a county. Hank told it like he always did, with wide eyes and just enough magic in his voice to make her laugh. Now the house had gone still. Eliza broke the silence first. "She's a good girl, she is," Hank replied softly. "More than I deserve most days. She loves you." He nodded once. "I didn't always know how to love her back." That made Eliza look up. Hank's gaze was fixed on the fire, like it held a memory he couldn't look at directly. "Her mama died on the trail. Fever hit fast. Bad. We were halfway across the Painted Valley. No doctor within 50 measures, just a small tent. One clean rag in my hands." Eliza's breath caught, but she said nothing. She was strong. Hank continued. "Didn't cry. Didn't beg. Just asked me to keep writing. To not stop for too long in the past." He paused. June saw it all. After that, she didn't speak for 3 months. Not a word. Not even to the preacher woman who took us in for a time. Eliza swallowed the fire's light dancing in her eyes. "I tried everything," Hank said. "Gifts, stories, silence. Nothing worked. Then one day, she was helping me patch a fence outside Bisbee, and she just said, 'The sky is not as big without her, is it?'" His voice broke slightly, just enough to show it was real. "I dropped the hammer," he added. "Hadn't cried since the war, but that day I did." A long silence followed. Only the fire spoke, popping and settling. Eliza finally asked, "Why did you come here?" Hank turned to her. She held his gaze. Out of all the places you could have gone, why this ranch? His answer came without pause. Because I was tired of running, he said. And I heard you never did. The words landed between them like a stone in a still pond. Eliza didn't blink. She let them sink deep into places she'd kept locked for years. She'd lost a husband, buried dreams beneath hard soil, and harder seasons fought through debt and dust, silence and sorrow. But as she sat there across from a man shaped by his own wounds, something shifted in her chest. She realized she'd survived all of it. But she'd never really lived again until now. Until a little girl called her ma'am like it meant safe. Until a man caught her before she fell and didn't let go. She looked down at the coffee cup in her hands, then up at Hank again. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't ask why, and she didn't need to explain. The morning came with a strange stillness. Eliza noticed at first the wind had gone quiet, the kind of hush that blanketed the ranch like a warning. Birds didn't sing. Even the old milk cow shifted uneasily in her stall. She felt it in her bones like a storm brewing, but without a cloud in sight. Hank was out by the chicken coop, hammering a loose hinge, while June sat on the porch, braiding a strip of cloth into her doll's dress. Then came the sound hoofbeat-tats, slow, steady, deliberate. Eliza stepped out of the barn with a pitchfork in hand, squinting toward the road. A man on horseback approached, tall in the saddle, dressed in a clean brown coat, too fine for ranch work boots, polished gloves untouched by dirt. His horse was restless beneath him, snorting as if it knew better than to be here. The rider dismounted with a smoothness that came from confidence, not kindness. He walked up the path like he owned it. Eliza didn't move. "Morning, ma'am," the man said, tipping his hat with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Silas Vane. I believe we have business." Hank had crossed the yard by now, slow but ready. His hand rested near the handle of his work knife. Casually, June watched from the porch, her braid unfinished fingers frozen mid-twist. "What kind of business?" Eliza asked. Voice even. Silas pulled a folded paper from inside his coat. "I represent certain interests. Seems your late husband left behind a considerable debt, cards, mostly from the Green Table Club over in Santa Cruz. This here's a writ notarized entitling the creditor to seize property equal to the unpaid sum." He handed it to her. Eliza didn't take it. "You're mistaken," she said. "My husband didn't gamble." Silas raised a brow. "Ma'am, I'm afraid that's not what the books say." Hank stepped forward, then slow and solid. "You always ride alone to collect undead men's bets." Silas turned his gaze. "And you must be the hired help. I'm the man standing between you and the fence line." Hank replied, voice like gravel. "So choose your next words careful." For a moment, the two men locked eyes. Then Silas chuckled, folded the paper, and tucked it back into his coat. "No need for tempers. I'm only here to inform." "As a courtesy, you can keep your courtesy," Eliza said flatly. "And your forged paper." Silas clicked his tongue. "You'd be wise to take this seriously. The folks I represent don't like delays, especially when property's in question." "Eliza Witt doesn't scare," Easy Hank said. "And neither do I." Silas gave a tight smile. "Then I suppose we'll let the courts decide. You'll be hearing from us again soon." He turned, mounted his horse in one smooth motion, and rode off with dust trailing behind like a warning. Eliza's hands clenched. "Who the hell was that?" she muttered. Hank watched the man disappear into the horizon. "Name doesn't matter. But that coat, that tone, I've seen it before. He's Dry Creek." Her stomach dropped. "The syndicate." He nodded. "They're not just buying land. They're building something, and they don't like no for an answer." Eliza turned toward the porch. June stood at the edge, wide-eyed but silent. "We can't let them take this place," she said. "We won't," Hank answered. "But we need more than grit. We need proof. Paper stronger than their lies." Eliza took a breath. "Then we go to town. Calder will know what to do." She looked at June. "Pack your things, sweetheart." "Are we leaving forever?" the girl asked. Eliza knelt beside her, smoothing a strand of hair from her face. "No," she said gently. "We're just going to remind some men that this land already has a name on it. Ours." The wind picked up again. Just a whisper at first, but it carried something new. Not fear, not quite, more like purpose. They would ride at dawn, They left before the sun rose, riding hard under a copper-streaked sky that promised more heat than comfort. Hank rode out front, eyes sharp beneath his hat brim, while Eliza and June followed close behind. The old trail to Clifton curved through a pass of rock and brush, where the shadows came early and stayed late. Even the birds kept quiet. They made it 15 miles by noon, stopping only once to water the horses and split a strip of jerky. June stayed silent, her eyes fixed on the trail ahead. She hadn't asked any more questions since they left. Just rode like she knew something was coming. And it was. They were maybe half a mile from the ridge when Hank pulled up, shorthand lifted. Eliza stopped beside him. "What is it?" He sniffed the air. Smoke. Wrong kind. Before she could answer, the first shot rang out a sharp crack from the rocks above. Hank shouted. Down bullets kicked up dirt inches from their boots. June screamed. Eliza yanked her down behind a ridge of scrub-hard hammering. Hank rolled off his horse, drew his Colt, and returned fire in one smooth motion. 3 of them he called, voice calm but taut. Rifles, poor aim but smart cover. Eliza's breath came in gasps. June clung to her arm, crying now. Another bullet winded past. Hank dropped one of the gunmen with a shot clean through the shoulder. A scream echoed off the canyon wall. Their flanking left, he yelled, "Eliza, take June!" But before he could finish, a shadow broke through the brush on their right. A rider charging hard, revolver raised, eyes fixed on June. Eliza didn't think. She grabbed her husband's old rifle from the saddle and fired. The shot cracked like thunder. The man tumbled from his horse, hitting the ground with a thud and a curse. Silence followed. A full beat passed. Then Hank fired once more. The third rider dropped his weapon and fled, crashing through brush like a broken wagon wheel. Eliza stood frozen, the rifle still smoking in her hands. Her chest heaved, her heart thudded loud in her ears. She hadn't fired a gun in over 4 years. June stared at her, eyes wide and wet. Then without a word, the girl flung her arms around Eliza's waist. "Mama," she whispered into her coat. Eliza didn't move at first. Couldn't. The word hit harder than any bullet. She dropped the rifle and knelt, pulling June close, burying her face in the girl's hair. Hank approached quietly, face smeared with dirt and smoke. Pistol still drawn but lowered. "You all right?" he asked. Eliza nodded against June's shoulder. "We're okay." He crouched beside them, hand resting on Eliza's back. She looked up, eyes met his. No words passed between them, just his hand, warm and rough, sliding into hers. Not possessive, not urgent, just there, steady, real. And in that silent second, under the scorched Arizona sky, surrounded by shell casings and frightened horses, Eliza realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. Clifton was a town that knew how to mind its own business until that business threatened one of their own. By the time Eliza, Hank, and June rode into town, the story of the ambush had already beat them there. Someone had seen the dust. Someone else had heard gunfire echo off the canyon wall. Word spread like dry grass catching flame. They rode straight to the town hall, horses luthered and lungs burning. Joseph Calder, the retired circuit lawyer Hank had mentioned, stood waiting on the steps, papers in hand, eyes sharp behind gold-rimmed spectacles. "Got your message," he said without greeting. "You weren't wrong. They're trying to push through a land claim based on a forged debt." Eliza slid down from the saddle legs, aching from the ride hands still wrapped in June's. "Can you stop it?" Calder nodded once. "Not alone. But you're not alone anymore." Inside the courthouse, the room was already crowded. Miners, ranchers, shopkeepers, folks Eliza had seen over the years, but never thought would stand for her. Some nodded as she passed, others didn't say a word, but their presence said enough. At the front stood Silas Vane, flanked by 2 men in fine vests and smug smiles. One held the fraudulent deed like a trophy. The other looked bored but dangerous. Mayor Trumbull called the room to order. "What's all this about Calder?" Joseph stepped forward, papers held high. "These are the original documents proving ownership of Whitlow Ranch. The land was paid in full by Benjamin Widow with 3 witnesses and notarized signatures." Additionally, he paused, unfolding a second letter. "We have correspondence recovered from the Whitlow estate that outlines an ongoing campaign of threats and coercion by individuals associated with the Dry Creek Syndicate." Silas scoffed. "That's hearsay and desperation. The law recognizes claims of debt. The law recognizes truth." Calder snapped back. And this town deserves to know who has been trying to steal its land out from under its boots. He turned to the crowd. How many of you have received offers, threats, letters, promises of money for silence? A murmur ran through the room. Then a hand rose. Old Man Barrow, who ran the feed store. Then another Miss Emery, the school teacher. Then more. Called her turn to Mayor Trumbull. If we allow these men to steal land with lies and threats, it won't stop at the Whitlow place. It'll be your barns, your wells, your children's names on deeds they never sold. The mayor looked down at the forged papers, then at the room full of furious, fed-up neighbors. Mr. Vane, he said, voice tightening, you and your men have 10 minutes to get out of Clifton. If I see you back here with more tricks, it won't be a courtroom you'll face. It'll be the people you tried to cheat. Silas went pale. You don't have that kind of authority I do. When the people stand behind me, Trumbull replied, and this time he wasn't speaking alone. The entire hall rose. Chairs scraped back. Boots hit the floor like war drums. Voices rose not in anger, but in unity. Silas backed away. Words caught in his throat. He and his men slipped out the side door, swallowed by the dust of their own retreat. Calder turned to Eliza and Hank. You held your ground, he said. Now the town's holding it with you outside. June took Eliza's hand. Are we safe now? Eliza knelt, brushing dust from the girl's cheek. We are now, she said, voice thick with something deeper than relief. Hank rested a hand on Eliza's shoulder, and for once she didn't flinch from the weight of it. The papers were signed that same afternoon. Mayor Trumbull made it official with the town seal pressed hard enough into the parchment that it left a dent in the wood below. The ink was barely dry when Joseph Calder handed Eliza the finalized deed with a half smile. It's yours, Mom, he said simply. On record by law and by blood? Eliza held the document like it weighed more than paper. Maybe it did. Maybe it held the weight of every sleepless night, every fence she mended. Every morning she stood alone on that porch waiting for the world to stop spinning out from under her boots. And now it was hers fully, rightfully, undeniably. Hank stood beside her, arms crossed loosely. What about me? He asked. Calder. Deadpan, you got a form for stubborn cowboys with bad knees and too many opinions? Calder raised an eyebrow. You looking to be on the deed? Hank turned to Eliza. She blinked, heart-skipping, unsure of the silence between them. He shrugged. Not my name, just something official. If you'll have me as a partner. Eliza didn't smile, but she nodded. You've already bled for this place. You've earned your corner. The ride home felt different, lighter. The dust didn't sting. The miles didn't stretch long. They weren't escaping anything. Now they were returning to something that finally belonged to them. Back at the ranch, the afternoon sun poured down golden and warm. The old fence still leaned. The coop door still squeaked, but it looked less like a burden and more like a beginning. Inside, June stood on a stool beside the counter, elbows deep in flour. Eliza moved around her slicing apples with practiced hands, dropping them into a bowl filled with cinnamon sugar and nutmeg. Their laughter drifted through the open window, carried on a breeze that smelled like something sweeter than just pie. Outside, Hank knelt beside the half-finished stable sleeves rolled shirt damp at the collar. He hammered in a new crossbeam, paused, wiped sweat from his brow, then looked up toward the kitchen window. He saw them there, mother and daughter, flower-dusted and radiant. And for a moment he just let himself feel the thing he hadn't dared to name. Later, with the pie cooling on the windowsill and the shadows stretching long over the yard, Eliza stepped onto the porch. Hank stood there leaning on the railing, watching the last of the light slip behind the hills. She joined him. He didn't speak at first. Then, voice low and steady, he said, I didn't come here just to help. She turned toward him, her eyes soft, unreadable. I came to stay, he said, if you'll have me. Eliza didn't look away. She didn't say a word right off. She just studied him. The scar along his jaw, the hands that had mended her fences, the man who'd never asked for anything more than to pull his weight. Then she smiled. Just a little. Supper's at 6, sure, she said. Don't be late. Hank let out a breath. That might have been laughter, or maybe just relief. And for the first time since he'd come down that trail, it wasn't the firelight or the roof or the land that felt like home. It was her. The night the lanterns came, the desert was quiet in a way only it could be, not silent, but listening. Eliza was in the kitchen wiping flour from the counter while June tidied up the tea towels. Outside, the wind stirred gently through the dry mesquite, rustling the brush like an old friend shuffling through familiar ground. Then came the first knock. Not loud, just enough to catch attention. Hank opened the door and blinked. Standing there was Mrs. Emery, the school teacher, with a bundle of wildflowers in one hand and a lantern in the other. "For the fence," she said softly, nodding to Eliza. Before Eliza could answer more, came Mr. Barrow, the feed store man, two young ranch hands from downriver, the widow cook who ran the masal, each one holding a lantern glass glowing warm and steady in the growing dusk. No one gave speeches. No one needed to. They fanned out across the yard, hanging the lanterns on fence posts, porch rails, even the old corral gate. Each flame flickered to life like a quiet vow. One by one, the townsfolk left. But the light stayed. That night, as dusk gave way to true dark, Whitlow Ranch glowed like a beacon on the prairie. Soft light dancing over rough boards, shadows easing away from corners that had once felt empty. Inside, June sat cross-legged on her bed with a small leather journal in her lap, a birthday gift from Hank, though no one had really marked a date. She dipped her pencil into the margin tongue, peeking between her lips in concentration. Some houses are built with nails, others with hearts. She underlined it once and then shut the book. Content, later the three of them sat on the front porch. The air smelled of dust, sage, and pie. Crickets chirped near the well. Far off, a coyote howled, but it sounded less like a threat now and more like a lullaby. 3 chairs, 1 home. Eliza leaned back, her hand resting on Hank's without needing permission. June leaned into her side blanket draped over her knees, eyes heavy with sleep. They didn't speak much. They didn't have to, because for the first time in years, the land didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to share. And in the glow of the lanterns under a sky stitched with stars, the Whitlow Ranch wasn't just standing, it was living. It was home. Commentary and thematic analysis. The cowboy knocked and said, "I was told you need a rancher," is not just a story about survival in the rugged West. It's a slow burning transformation, a deeply human journey from grief and isolation toward healing, belonging, and quiet love. At its heart, this narrative is about inner transformation. Eliza Whitlow begins as a figure of strength, forged by loss, widowed, weathered, and weary. Her arc is subtle but powerful. She doesn't suddenly fall in love or forget her pain. Instead, she learns to trust again, to allow others in, and ultimately to live again. Hank Mercer, the widower hour, with a past of his own, represents redemption and steady presence, a man trying not to escape his grief, but to build something true from its ashes. And then there's June, the child whose innocence and quiet yearning act as the spiritual bridge between them. She doesn't just witness their growth, she anchors it. Thematically, the story taps into classic Western ideals, justice, loyalty, resilience, but reframes them through emotional intimacy and acts of care over conflict. There are moments of action, yes, but the most resonant victories come from standing ground, with truth protecting what matters with unwavering resolve and choosing connection over solitude. This story also resonates deeply in a YouTube storytelling context. It avoids gratuitous violence or overt sensuality, aligning with content policies and ensuring accessibility for a broad audience. Instead, it centers on human values, trust earned through action, families formed through choice, and homes built not just with wood and nails, but with memory, sweat, and belief. In the end, the lanterns of Whitlow Ranch do more than light up a fence line. They symbolize the community's affirmation, the rekindled warmth of a found family, and the enduring truth of the West that love like land is worth holding on to when you build it right. If you figure the West ain't just cattle drives and saloon brawls, but long roads that lead to second chances to folks finding their place beneath wide skies and even wider hearts, then you're in the right saddle. Friend, here at the Wild West Stories, we don't just tell tales of gunsmoke and grit. We whisper the ones about family redemption and the quiet courage to start again. So if tonight's story sat warm in your chest like firelight after a cold ride, don't stray too far. Another tale's brewing out past the ridgeline where love meets dust and truth rides tall. Stay close to the fire, friend. I'll be here waiting.